I was in Cambodia recently, Cambodia and Thailand, and one thing that we noticed as we walked through some of the stores, like they have convenience stores on every corner, and we would walk through the stores just trying to sample like the local cuisine, which had a whole lot less chemicals in it than our cuisine. But we would walk in there and we'd be like, oh, that's unfortunate. Because in those two countries, they have a lot of English-speaking people who come, and so they dual label their stuff. And so we would see it written in Khmer, which is the language in Cambodia, and then we would see it written in English, and we would just go, oh, that doesn't mean what they think it means. And it made for some really big laughs for me and my friends. I want to show you a couple of those things. These are not items I took pictures of. These are ones I found on the internet. But I want you to see how you can easily mislabel things when they're translated into different cultures. Look at this. This is shrimp-flavored crack. So if you're interested, I'm not sure what language that's written in. If you know, let people know they're into shrimp-flavored crack. It sounds appetizing for some people. All right. Not only do we have shrimp-flavored crack, but if you like meat and you are a hamburger connoisseur, you can get Barfy, the hamburger. Barfy. So appetizing. And then, if you're out at a summer, barbecue, you're grilling up some Barfy, you're having some shrimp crack, you might get parched with the summer heat, right? You might need something to drink. And might I suggest pea cola? That person needs to drink more water. And after all of that stuff goes through you, all the crack, the shrimp flavored crack, and the Barfy burger and the pea cola, you may want some chips. And I might suggest poo, chips. Now the point of that is that these products do not translate well into our culture. Our language takes products where they would have never thought anything wrong with what they were putting on the packaging, but we might package them differently in America. Like those chips, they may be the best chips in the world, but I'm never eating them. Because I don't know what they're made out of, but I got a good idea. But when we think about the fact that these products were mislabeled in our culture, oftentimes people are mislabeled in the culture of the kingdom of God. And here's what I mean. See, all throughout history, people have labeled each other. Other people put labels on us. And then not only is that bad enough, but we put labels on ourselves. And what we're going to see this morning is that these labels that we put on ourselves or that other people put on us, they don't translate in the kingdom of God. And now until Christmas, what we're going to do over the next 3 messages, so this Sunday, next Sunday, and Christmas Eve, we're going to walk through a part of the Bible that many of us in this room have skipped over when we open up the Gospel of Matthew. We're like, get me past the first part. If I could just open it up and skip all those names that I can't pronounce, like that would be great. Let's get right to the birth of Christ, right? Well, we're going to spend 3 messages in that part of the Bible that we all seem to skip over. We're going to walk through the lineage of Jesus. We're going to look at Christmas through the Old Testament. All the people, with the exception of Jesus' parents, listed in Matthew's genealogy are all Old Testament people that have paved the way for what we're celebrating now in 2 weeks from today, or about 2 weeks from today. So if you have your Bibles, open up to the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 1. Gospel of Matthew, chapter 1. We're going to start in verse 1, and we're going to deal with, I think, 7 verses here this morning. Starting in verse 1, it says, "The book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Now, genealogies were really big back in Jesus' time. They gave a lot of credibility to the people they were written about. And they would trace their ancestry back generations upon generations. It was kind of like a huge family tree. Like, I don't even know who really my great-grandparents are. But we're going to see they trace Jesus all the way back now to the time of Abraham in the book of Matthew. And we're going to see, one of the things that we're going to see is we're going to see all sorts of different types of people. It's my favorite part of Jesus' genealogy. And we're going to dive in. That's really what I want to look at here today. So look at verse 2. Abraham was the father of Isaac. Okay, so we start with Abraham in verse 2. Abraham is in the lineage of Jesus. So you start to see, as the Old Testament unfolds and you get to the genealogy of Jesus, you start to see God has a plan. That there's no mistake about why Abraham was written about in Genesis, because God had a plan all the way back in the book of Genesis chapter 12 when he stands before Abraham and in chapter 15 when he makes his covenant with him, and he has this plan for Abraham's life, and it's not just about Abraham. The book of Genesis, where it talks about Abraham, is not just about Abraham. It's also about Jesus, because Abraham would now pave the way for Jesus. And the good thing about Abraham is we know from reading his story that there is no questionable things in his past. Or is there? Genesis chapter 12, verse 10. Now there was a famine in the land. So Abram, before he had his name changed, Abram went down to Egypt to sojourn there, for the famine was severe in the land. So he goes down to sojourn in Egypt. And what we're going to see is Abram is governed a lot of times by his fleshly fear. And watch what happens. So in verse 11, when he was about to enter Egypt, he said to Sarai, or Sarah, as her name would later be changed to, Sarai, his wife, I know that you are a woman of beautiful in appearance. So he looks at her and he's like, you are unquestionably, undoubtedly, the most beautiful woman I or anyone else has ever laid their eyes on. And he says, I know that you are a woman. He's buttering her up, I think. There's a little bit of, there's some truth here. We're going to get to that in a minute. But we see that she's a woman, beautiful in appearance. And he predicts that when the Egyptians see her, they will say, this is his wife. Then they will kill me, but they will let you live. And so he starts to look at the future. He says, I've got this beautiful wife. They're going to want her. And those Egyptians, they're kind of barbarians. Like they're not just going to ask me for her. They're going to kill me, making her available. And then all of a sudden now they can have her as their own. And so he makes these predictions in his mind. He starts to fill in the blanks, right? We do that so often in our lives. We start to fill in the blanks. We don't have the whole story. But we see one thing and we're like, well, if that's true, then I can play this out in my head. And I can tell you the times that I've been right is right around 1% of the time. I play out the story in my mind of how it's supposed to be. And I'm never right, but I'm always convinced I'm right. And Abram is convinced that he's right. And so he says to her now, say, you are my sister, that it may go well with me because of you, and that my life may be spared for your sake. And so he comes up with this plan, Abram, and he says, hey, I'm willing to allow you to be an adulteress so that I can live. Like you say you're my sister so that I don't have to face the consequences of you being my wife. And now, in verse 14, when Abram entered Egypt, the Egyptians saw that the woman was very beautiful. He was right. And when the princes of Pharaoh saw her, they praised her to Pharaoh. They're like, oh my gosh, Pharaoh, you have to look at this woman. I've never seen anything like her. She's just drop dead gorgeous. She's beautiful. And because she was the sister to Abram, the woman was taken to Pharaoh's house. I'll let you fill in the blanks of what you think happened there. Abram has a checkered past, and you wish he learned. But in chapter 20, after his name had already been changed, we get another story. Verse 1. From there, Abraham journeyed toward the territory of the Negeb and lived between Kadesh and Shur, and he sojourned in Gerar. And Abraham said of Sarah, his wife, "She is my sister." And Abimelech, king of Gerar, sent and took Sarah. And so, post-name change, we see Abraham like a dog returning to its vomit. Abraham returns to his old ways, still not wanting to die, not willing to put his marriage on the line. He instead says, "She's my sister" again, and a second time. A second time he serves her up. Now, the end of the story is Abimelech actually catches him before anything goes down. But Abraham was willing to put his wife on a platter, to not cherish her, protect her, guard her, because he was afraid of what these rulers would do to him. Abraham has a checkered past, and yet he's in the lineage of Jesus. Matthew continues in the lineage of Jesus, verse 2, and Isaac, the father of Jacob. And what we know of Isaac is he has no checkered past, does he? Here's the funny thing. It's not funny, it's actually extremely sad. But it's amazing to see how the sins of the father become the sins of the son. It's an incredible responsibility that us dads have to raise our kids to know the Lord, to do the work on our souls so that we don't pass on our sin and our tendencies to our kids. The sins of the father oftentimes, not formulaic in nature, but oftentimes are passed down to the kids because they experience the sins of the father. Look at what Isaac does now in Genesis 26, verse 7. When the men of the place asked him about his wife, he said, "She is my sister." Exactly what his dad did. "She is my sister," for he feared to say "my wife," thinking lest the men of the place should kill me because of Rebekah, because she was attractive in appearance. Once again, a man in Jesus' lineage serves up his wife on a platter to men who had no business laying with her. Matthew continues down the lineage. And Jacob, the father of Judah and his brothers. Now, Jacob has a different sin tendency. Jacob wants what belongs to other people. He longs for what has been promised now to his brother Esau. Genesis 27, verse 18, you're going to see this story play out, and we see, in an incredible way, we see the scheme that he now has with his mom. So he went to his father, Jacob, went to his father and said, "My father." And he said, "Here I am. Who are you, my son?" Now, his dad gives him a chance to say, "It's me, Jacob." He says, "Who are you, my son? Are you Esau or are you Jacob?" And he comes and he gives him a chance. And Jacob now, in verse 19, says to his father, "I am Esau, your firstborn. I've done as you told me. Now sit up and eat of my game, that your soul may bless me." And he looks, says, "This is my chance." And he goes in and he tells his dad that he is his brother, hoping that he would get the blessing that was due to the oldest son. Verse 20, but Isaac said to his son, how is it that you have found it so quickly, my son? He answered, because the Lord your God granted me success. Then Isaac said to Jacob, please come near that I may feel you, my son, to know whether you are really my son Esau or not. See, Esau was a hairy man. He was a beast. He was like the manly man. Isaac knew that. Jacob, not so much. Jacob was a clean-cut, baby-faced kind of guy. He says, come near so I can tell whether you're lying or not. So Jacob went near to Isaac, his father, who felt him and said, the voice is Jacob's voice, but the hands are the hands of Esau. Now, Isaac was an old man. His ears could deceive him. But his hands, his touch. See, what Jacob's mom had is she skinned the goat and put the skins on him to make it look like he was hairy like his brother Esau. And then in verse 23, and he did not recognize him because his hands were hairy like his brother Esau's hands. So he blessed him. He said, are you really my son Esau? He gives him a second chance to be honest. Are you really my son? And he answered, I am. Now, never mind that the name Jacob in Hebrew means trickster. We don't need to know that to know the nature of Jacob. He was a dishonest man who envied what his brother had coming to him and was willing to do things that he knew he shouldn't do in order to get what belonged to somebody else. He was a liar. He was a thief. Jacob had a checkered past. Doesn't stop there. Matthew, verse 3. And Judah, the father of Perez and Zerah by Tamar, and Perez the father of Hezron, and Hezron the father of Ram. Now, we got to get into the story now of Judah. There are two different stories. Judah was a piece of work, which is interesting because we're going to see later on in life that Jesus comes out of the tribe of Judah. Judah is in the lineage now of Jesus. And so the first story that we have of Judah is with his brother Joseph. Now, one of my favorite stories in all of the Bible, I love the story of Joseph. But Joseph, the brother of Judah, one of the 12 tribes, right? Judah and his brothers do something horrible to their brother Joseph. Now, Joseph comes to them a little bit arrogant, I think, and stands before them one day and says, hey, bros, I had a dream. I had a dream, and it was incredible. You're going to love to hear about this dream. This dream was me, and you were all bowing down to me. He actually thought they wanted to hear that. I would have kept that to myself. Later on, when it came true, I'd have been like, guess what, guys? But he just comes out in all of his arrogance, and he says, hey, I had a dream. Someday, all of you, my brothers, most of whom are older than me, all but one, you're going to bow down to me. Then he has another dream. It's not just his brothers that are bowing down. Now it's his parents as well. And they're all bowing down to him. And so his brothers were a little ticked off. They're a little upset. I mean, I can understand why. I don't understand what they then did, but I understand their anger at what Joseph was telling them. So they got together, and they, after his dad, Israel, gave a coat of many colors, which we've heard, right? Joseph in the Technicolor dream coat, like we've heard of all that stuff. He gives them this coat signifying royalty, and they round him up. 10 of his brothers round him up and take him and throw him in a pit. They throw him in a pit. They snatch the robe off, throw him in a pit. They go back to their dad and say, hey, Joseph's been killed. He's been eaten. We've got his coat, but that's all that's left of him. But Judah, it doesn't sit right with him. And so Judah now in Genesis 37, verse 26 and following says to his brothers, what profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? We're not getting anything. I think there's a way we can profit from this. I think there's a way we can win. Instead of just killing him, why don't we do something else? And so in verse 27, he says, come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him. In other words, we didn't kill him. If he dies, it's the Ishmaelites that will kill him. But let's at least get something out of it. Let's sell him, for he's our brother, our own flesh. And his brothers listened to him. Then Midianite traders passed by, and they drew Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. They took Joseph to Egypt. About 3 months later, well, we'll get into that in a second. We'll back up for a second. Let's wrap up this story first. So we have now Judah in the lineage of Jesus selling his brother into slavery. And what's about to happen in Joseph's life is a bunch of turmoil. He's gonna get falsely accused. He's gonna get thrown into prison. He's gonna get forgotten, all at the hands of his brother Judah. I know it wasn't God's plan, but you got to think there were times where Joseph was like, why didn't they just kill me? But that's not it. See, 3 months later, we are introduced now to Judah's daughter-in-law, Tamar. Now, Tamar married Judah's oldest son, and he was an awful man. Abused her in ways nobody should be abused. And God killed him. And because of the Levirate marriage rules, she then becomes promised to the next youngest son. It just goes down. How many of you would like to be, if something happened to your husband, would like to marry your brother-in-law? Nobody, I know. Kristen either. But that was the law of the time. And so she was promised then to Judah's second oldest son. He was awful as well, and God killed him. The third youngest son, or the youngest son, the third oldest son, was too young to take place in marriage. And so what Judah did is he looked at Tamar and he said, hey, I'm going to promise you my son when he becomes of marrying age, and you'll be able to marry him. See, marriage and bearing children was everything to women in this age. They had no credibility, no resources, no one to take care of them if they weren't married. And so Tamar looks on and she goes, okay, I'm in. That's the law. I'll wait, and we'll hope that this one's better than the last two. Only she waited and waited and waited. And when he became marrying age, Judah did nothing. And so Tamar comes up with this plan. She says, if you're not going to take care of me, I'm going to take care of myself. That's how we get into a lot of problems, by the way. And so she dresses up like a temple prostitute. And she meets Judah on the road, and she lays with him. And she gets pregnant. And 3 months later, Judah was told, Tamar, your daughter-in-law has been immoral. Moreover, she is pregnant by immorality. And Judah said, bring her out and let her be burned. No, it doesn't matter that Judah was immoral. He doesn't care about his own immorality. How often do we do that? Jesus talks about it in this way. He says, hey, you've got this big giant telephone pole in your eye. How about you take that out first and then help your brother with the speck in his eye? Judah has a big old telephone pole coming out of his head. I mean, he laid with a temple prostitute, a man of God. And now she's pregnant. And he says, bring her out and let her be burned. But Tamar's smart. See, when she lay with Judah, she actually got him to give her some things to signify a promise. She got a few things that now she's going to play back in his face. Look at verse 25. As she was being brought out, she sent word to her father-in-law, by the man to whom these belong, I am pregnant. And she said, please identify whose these are, the signet and the cord and the staff, the exact things that Judah gave to that woman. Then Judah identified them and said, she is more righteous than I. Duh. Since I did not give her to my son Shelah, and he did not know her again. Judah had a checkered past. See, Judah would have been labeled. He would have been labeled a trafficker. He would have been labeled an adulterer. And yet he's in the lineage of Jesus. Matthew continues in verse 4 and following. And Ram, the father of Amminadab, and Amminadab, the father of Nahshon, and Nahshon, the father of Salmon. And Salmon, the father of Boaz, by who? Rahab. Do you remember the book of Joshua? Chapter 2? We see Rahab come into picture. And Joshua, the son of Nun, sent 2 men secretly from Shittim as spies, saying, go, view the land, especially Jericho. And they went and came into the house of a prostitute whose name was Rahab, and lodged there. See, the story of Rahab is a fascinating story, because as the men come into Jericho, she is labeled as a harlot or a prostitute. And there she seemingly meets the one true God. She had heard about him and what he was doing all around, giving over armies and countries to the Israelite people, to Joshua. And she recognizes as the spies come into her house that these spies are workers of the one true God. And so she hides them up on her roof. The rest of the story plays out, right? The army marches around for 7 days. 6 days they march around one time. The 7th day they march around 7 times. They blow their trumpets, and what happens? The walls of Jericho fall. And as soon as those walls of Jericho fall, the spies who told Rahab to put a cord, a red crimson cord in her window, go straight for that, and they rescue Rahab. See, Rahab, even in the Bible, all throughout, even in the book of Matthew, Rahab is labeled. And what's fascinating about genealogies is they did not include women. Nowhere do we see genealogies include women, but here we do. And I think it's for the purpose of our message here this morning. Matthew continues with another woman. And Boaz, the father of Obed, by Ruth, and Obed, the father of Jesse. So who's this Ruth woman? Well, Ruth, we see in the book of Ruth, chapter 1, starting in verse 3, says, but Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, died. So Naomi's husband died, and she was left with her 2 sons. These took Moabite wives, foreign wives. The name of the one was Orpah, and the name of the other Ruth, who is now in the lineage of Jesus. And they lived there about 10 years. And what happens is Ruth comes and she gleans in the crops of Boaz, in the fields of Boaz. And this really wealthy guy comes and she says, will you be my kinsman redeemer? In other words, will you marry me because my husband died? And he says, there's one more in the line before me, a man of honor, a man of integrity. He says, go. And if he says he won't marry you, I will. So she does that. He says no, and so Ruth, the Moabite woman, marries into the lineage of Jesus. A foreigner, a Gentile, and more than just the Gentile, an idol worshiper. The Moabites worshipped idols, and they were outside of the people of God. And we're looking now, and we're going, oh my goodness, look at what God is doing. He's weaving in Rahab. He's weaving in Ruth. There's no reason for women to be in the genealogy unless God was showing us the whole time that his plan was to weave in Gentiles into the people of God. Matthew continues. And Jesse, the father of David, the king, and David was the father of Solomon by the wife of Uriah. Interesting. Matthew did not like Bathsheba. A Jewish man would have contempt for Bathsheba. And here's what I want you to know, and I know this is a touchy subject, but a lot of people assume that David abused Bathsheba. She knew what she was doing. She was hitting on him from her place. She was bathing in an open window, facing. It doesn't mean what David did was right. It simply means it takes two to tango. She was not abused. And Matthew knew it. So instead of saying the father of Solomon by Bathsheba, Matthew says by the wife of Uriah. Two things. He doesn't have to name Bathsheba, but also he points out the scandal of having David in the line of Jesus. Because not only did he have a child with the wife of Uriah, it points out the whole story of David. Look at 2 Samuel. It happened late one afternoon when David arose from his couch and was walking on the roof of the king's house that he saw from the roof a woman bathing, and the woman was very beautiful. And David sent and inquired about the woman, and one said, is not this Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite? She's married to a man who serves in the military that David leads. So David sent messengers and took her, and she came to him and lay with her. Now she had been purifying herself from her uncleanness. Then she returned to her house. And just a little while later, the woman conceived and found out that she was pregnant. Now that's bad enough. That's scandal enough to look at the line of Jesus and say, David, this adulterer, Bathsheba, this adulteress. But it gets worse because David's going to now try and rectify the situation on his own. And so David sends for Uriah, and he just says, hey, if I could just get him to lay with her, then I can blame it on him. He'll think that this child belongs to him. Everything will be good. But he doesn't go for it. And so, after Uriah returns to the battlefield, in the morning, David wrote a letter to Joab, sent it by the hand of Uriah. In the letter, he wrote, set Uriah in the forefront of the hardest fighting. Put him on the front lines, as far out there as you can. And then draw back from him. that he may be struck down and die. And Joab was besieging the city. He assigned Uriah to the place where he knew were valiant men. And the men of the city came out and fought with Joab, and some of the servants of David among the people fell. Uriah the Hittite also died. And I want to recap for you now what we have. We have Abraham, who served up his wife Sarah. We have Isaac, who served up his wife Rebekah. We have Jacob, who deceived his father, lied, took what didn't belong to him. We have Judah, sold his brother into slavery, lay with his daughter-in-law, and didn't give her what she deserved. We have Rahab, the prostitute. We have Ruth, the Moabite, who worships other false gods. We have David in the line of Jesus, who is now an adulterer and a murderer. Here's what I want to ask you. What label of shame do you wear on your chest? See, we all have shame. The fall of man brings shame on us all. We all look at our past, just like David or just like Ruth or just like Rahab. We look at our past and we see labels. See, people love to put labels on us. They put labels on us, and we carry around the labels that they put on us, and we walk around and we say, I'm an addict. It's who I am. People look at us, and there's no redemption in what they do. We put this name tag on, and we walk around, and forever that's our identity, because our past has some addiction in it. We've dealt with that, but we still wear the label that people put on us of addict. But what's worse than that is we label ourselves. In the quiet and the inner dialogue that happens in our head, we look at ourselves and we start to convince ourselves that we deserve labels that God would never put on us. So we take these labels off, and all of a sudden we just go, nope, I'm not enough. And we walk around with not being enough. We convince ourselves that what we have to offer is not what God created us to offer. That we should somehow be offering more than who God created us to be. We continue to put labels on ourselves. Because if we're not enough, then we must be unlovable. And I don't know what labels you put on yourself or what labels society has put on you. It could revolve around a divorce that wasn't even your fault, abuse that you had at the hands of another person, some expectation you have of yourself that God never had in the first place, children that have walked away from the Lord. I don't know what your labels are, the labels you choose to put on yourself or the labels you choose to allow others to put on yourself. But here's the beauty of Christmas. The beauty of Christmas is that Jesus came not to cover up these labels, but to take them off. He came to take off the labels that other people put on us. He came to take off the labels that we allow ourselves to put on our chest. And he gives us a different label. He gives us a label of forgiven, of redeemed, of made new. He looks at the lineage of Jesus and he goes, yeah, those are scandalous people who have been redeemed by my grace. Jesus came on Christmas Day to deal with all sorts of checkered pasts. And these people that we talked about today are people who wouldn't be allowed to darken most doors of churches in our country. People who have a checkered past of some sort. that have been redeemed, and all of a sudden they're labeled. Jesus came from a scandalous family full of people who are not good enough. And Jesus came to save victim and perpetrator. That's hard for us. He came to save sinner and sinned against. Look at what he says in Luke chapter 5, verse 31. And Jesus answered them, "Those who are well have no need for a physician, but those who are sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance." And here's the bottom line. Jesus came into the world to give us a new label that only he could give. We don't have to wear the labels that the world gives us once we embrace the label that Jesus gives us. Jesus came from a scandalous family. Think about Abraham and his shame. Jesus bore that shame on the cross. Think about Jacob's shame for a lifetime of deception. Jesus bore that shame as he told the truth. Think about Judah's shame over selling his brother to slave traders or lying with his son's wife, Tamar. Jesus, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, paid for those on the cross. Think of King David's shame over taking another man's wife into bed and then organizing his murder. Jesus came to bear that on the cross as well, and he came to bear your shame and your guilt on the cross. You do not have to walk around with it. You don't have to carry it with you. You can leave it at the foot of the cross because Jesus, a baby, was born in the manger, the perfect combination, fully God and fully man. Don't miss that this Christmas. It's not just about God coming into the world. It's about God living as fully God and fully man so that he can pay the perfect sacrifice. If Jesus wasn't God and man, his sacrifice would have meant nothing. If he was only God, he couldn't die. If he was only man, he couldn't be righteous. But because God made him fully God and fully man, he could die the perfect sacrifice to give us a new label. The question really is, what label are you going to continue to wear? Because we can know this and not wear it. We can know it, we just kind of take it off and put it here and save it for later. And like, that's comforting, but we just wear around these old labels. Whatever your label is, we just wear them when Jesus meant to take them off and put on a different label. This Christmas, will you walk in the forgiveness that Jesus came to bring? He took on all the shame of his scandalous family, and he will bear the weight of your shame as well. And all you have to do is place yourself in submission to him and put the new label that he came to bring proudly on your chest.